I first saw The Incredible Shrinking Man on Creature Double Feature in Massachusetts, where I grew up. Saturday afternoons, double feature. And it was The Incredible Shrinking Man and Tarantula. And both were a little guy fighting a normal spider that looked giant, or a regular-sized person fighting a giant spider, which was actually normal.
However, not played by the same spider, although there's a rumor that the same spider had the same part in both those pictures, but unfortunately that wasn't true. I'm old enough to have seen this picture first run.
Wow.
I'm embarrassed to say. I was 11 years old in 1957. I went to the movies very frequently, saw lots of science fiction pictures and westerns and stuff, but I had really never seen anything like The Incredible Shrinking Man, which was, on the surface, the usual Universal International science fiction picture of a type that they were excelling at. But the whole tone of the movie and the ending and the overview of the picture was just astonishing to me. And I was surprised to learn later that it hadn't been a big hit. It did well, considering the fact that it didn't cost a great deal. But I think partly due to the ghettoization of that genre, it wasn't really taken very seriously. The reviews were not so good. I mean, you know, the Bosley Crothers of the world who don't like these kind of movies anyway.
Sure, yeah. No one named Bosley is going to give this movie a positive review.
Yeah, no. It was sort of in my critical pantheon, and it seems to have taken quite a bit of time over the years to sort of garnish its reputation, even among its own writer. Ostensibly, Matheson got the idea by seeing a movie that Ray Milland was in where he put on a hat that was too big for him. And he thought, what if somebody put their clothes on in the morning and they didn't fit anymore?
The story is much more than a guy gets smaller. Richard Matheson was, at the time, a freelance writer. The story, The Shrinking Man, is full of his anxiety of being able to support his family on the income and constant instability of being a freelance writer.
I want you to start thinking about us, our marriage. Some awful things might happen. There's a limit to your obligation.
Oh, now, wait a minute.
And the book is a little bit more graphic about the problems of not being able to satisfy your wife.
You love Scott Carey. He has a size and a shape and a way of thinking.
There is so much sexual anxiety in that book, and he gets picked up by a child molester in the book. There's all of that stuff with his wife and his physical dilemma.
I felt puny and absurd. A ludicrous midget.
And The Shrinking Man can be taken as two ways. Is it the shrinking man or the shrinking man, you know? And the anxiety of the male identity in post-World War II America, because he did serve in the war. It's a PTSD testament, really. It's all crammed into a B-movie package of a guy fighting a spider. He wrote it in the basement of a house they were renting, because he had kids and that was where it was quiet. And so he takes his anxieties down to the basement and writes a story about a guy trying to survive in a basement. It's bizarrely autobiographical. It's a lot more than, oh, the cat's bigger than I am now.
It's the kind of book that, had it been made 20 years later, you could have taken a different approach. But this was the 1950s.
Right.
And it is a quintessential 50s movie.
Richard Matheson is cited by Stephen King as the guy that inspired him to write. I mean, he is, to use the rock and roll analogy, he is Chuck Berry. Like, he's the guy that sort of figured out how to do.
I Am Legend was one of the books that he wrote that put him on the map because it was a brand new take on an old story. He wrote a script for it for Hammer Films, and the British censor wouldn't let them make it. And so he sold the script to Robert Lippert, who made it in Italy under the title Last Man on Earth. But Matheson didn't like the movie and took his name off it. He used his pen name, Logan Swanson.
Logan, and I know this because that poster is in my office.
What's interesting, of all the adaptations, it's the closest
Yes.
adaptation to the book of all the ones that have been done. And Matheson's fortunes obviously rose after this picture, and then after the Edgar Allan Poe pictures with Roger Corman.
Right.
and The Twilight Zone.
Yeah, there was a group of writers in Southern California that came together in the 50s. They had many names, and the Southern California Sorcerers was one of the names. Ray Bradbury was the leader of the pack for a while, then Charles Beaumont, Richard Matheson, George Clayton Johnson. They all worked together on The Twilight Zone, and then they went off and fed Hollywood their stories for a decade.
Yeah. I was lucky enough to know and work with Richard Matheson. He did my episode of the Twilight Zone movie. And of course, I was kind of in awe because I started reading his stuff when I was in high school. And he was one of the group of those writers that we all really liked.
Did you do A Good Life?
I did The Good Life.
Yeah,
yes.
The Good Life.
It was based on a Jerome Bixby story.
Right.
But, obviously Richard was very familiar with all this material. We were told that we had to remake old episodes.
Right.
And I thought, everybody's seen them. They all have twists at the end. Everybody else. So we tried to disguise.
I shared that opinion.
we tried to disguise It's a Good Life so that people who had seen it on television wouldn't recognize what story it was.
Yeah, and
until
I
they
thought
got
it was
to the
very.
middle of it.
I thought it was very successful.
And that was all Richard, and he just said we just need another angle, and I said, how about cartoons? Because we're Warner Brothers, and we can have the kid live in a cartoon world, and so that was what we did, and Richard ran with it, and he was great.
Yeah.
And over the years, we actually made other attempts to collaborate on things that didn't happen, as so often happens in this business.
His fingerprints are on so many things. Duel. He wrote the TV movie The Night Stalker. He modernized the genre in a way that was pretty breathtaking.
Eventually, Louise would come to the cellar. Until then, I had to keep myself alive with whatever resources I could discover in my basement universe and in myself.
Matheson makes this fantastical story believable by going into the minutia and examining the problems that you would have. The obsession with the practicality of being small, and in the book, it's water, food. I mean, the book, there's so much talk about crackers in that book, like how to keep them dry, how to keep them away from a spider, and all of that stuff. When you're so grounded in that, the fantastical element just folds in quite naturally. Yeah.
Which I think is one of the reasons that I think Stephen King was drawn to Matheson, was that very reason.
Yeah.
Because one of the appeals of Stephen King was the ordinariness of the world and the level of detail, which has always eluded, I think, the cinematic adaptations of Stephen King.
Yes.
That when you read the books, the levels of detail, the pop culture references, all those kind of things that you can only do in a book are such a part and parcel of what makes King's work great. That it's hard to translate that into a film. In the book, The Shrinking Man was written in a non-linear fashion.
Right.
It's full of flashbacks. And Matheson's original script was also non-linear and started with flashbacks. And at some point, he was either taken off the movie or he was elsewhere. And the producers brought in a writer named Richard Allen Simmons, and his job was to take the picture and put it back in chronological order.
Yeah.
He gets no credit. But in 1957, I don't think you could do a movie in that fashion, and to start out with a guy who's shrinking and then learn why did he shrink, whereas the audience goes, well, he's already shrunken. I mean, I don't care.
Yeah.
I don't care how he got there.
Well, I saw an interview with Jack Arnold, the director, who said, you can't have flashbacks. like he was just adamant against them because he thought it uncoupled the emotional train and reset it, and then you had to go back. And there's an argument pro and con. It does work in the book, but the book, because it's a book, it's an internal story. It's what's going on in this guy's mind, so it's a different experience.
Would other beings follow me into this vast new world? So close. The infinitesimal and the infinite. But suddenly I knew they were really the two ends of the same concept. The unbelievably small and the unbelievably vast eventually meet, like the closing of a gigantic circle.
The ending of The Incredible Shrinking Man is incredibly poetic. He was looking at his situation from his own point of view as to what defines existence, and he assumed that man defines existence, when in fact, existence is much bigger than that.
Yes, smaller than the smallest. I meant something too. To God, there is no zero.
For years, Matheson resisted the movie. He didn't feel that it had worked the way he wanted, and he particularly didn't seem to like the ending. But later, he was sort of importuned to pay a little closer attention to the movie, and he came around, and he started to realize that it really did work, and it was really good. And there was some contretemps at the time about the ending, which, quote, didn't test well.
Right, but
well, we all know what that means.
sure, yeah. And Arnold said purportedly, he said like they wanted him to find a cure and become big again.
Everybody said why can't he be cured? Why can't he grow back big again? And it's like, well, because he doesn't.
Yeah.
Remarkably, and I don't know how they pulled it off, but remarkably, despite the bad test scores, they released the picture with the correct ending.
Yeah, and you have to give a shout out to Jack Arnold for digging in his heels, because supposedly he said, "Over my dead body." He was a company man. I mean, like, Jack Arnold was a contract director at Universal. He had a steady job.
To be a contract director usually meant that you did a picture for a studio and they liked you enough to say, well, let's get this guy to do more stuff. So Jack spent a lot of his early career at Universal because he had done this picture that made money, and then he made another picture that made even more money, and it was like now he was part of the family.
Yeah, he's basically an employee of the Universal Studios Corporation.
They call it a family.
But it's a company. And you are an employee in ways like if you work for Amazon and you're a forklift driver, you're a director, and we're going to give you stuff to direct.
Right.
And until you mess it up, that's what you're going to do for a living.
And that was true at most studios, but the question was, here's your next assignment.
Right.
And, it's like in Mission Impossible, if you choose to accept it. Well, if you don't choose to accept it,
they're going to stop giving you
very many
assignments,
more
right.
assignments. And so Jack ended up making pictures that I think he probably didn't think were all that great, but he was a professional, and so he made the best he could out of every assignment that he was given. And sometimes the magic works, and sometimes the magic doesn't.
Sure.
He did a picture called Girls in the Night.
Yeah, Girls in the Night was his first big
film. I think for Universal, and then that sort of got his
juvenile delinquent scare film.
Yeah, and then he did It Came from Outer Space, which was a huge 3D hit, and that led to The Creature from the Black Lagoon, which led to his science fiction period, which he never condescended to. He never said, well, those pictures are beneath me. He seemed to really get on board with that.
Like The Incredible Shrinking Man, Incredible Shrinking Man is written by Richard Matheson. It Came from Outer Space was written by Ray Bradbury. It's a movie above its title. The aliens in It Came from Outer Space are not here to take over the planet. They're here to not get murdered by us while they fix their ship. I mean, it's a great story.
But in later iterations, they want our women.
Yeah. Who wouldn't? Can you blame them? I don't even think it was frustrating, because I think it was just the reality of the day to have a movie that was serious and had a great story, but it was in the science fiction genre, and it got an exploitive title. And
well, there were a series of vaguely progressive science fiction pictures at the beginning, like The Day the Earth Stood Still and It Came from Outer Space, and movies where the aliens were not necessarily bad people, they were just people who had problems. But still, at the time, when all the other pictures were about disguised communist invasions, it was a breath of fresh air.
Yeah.
Universal did a lot of Westerns, and he did one of the best Westerns of the 50s, No Name on the Bullet, which is a Audie Murphy picture in which he played a killer who comes to town. He's supposed to kill somebody, only there's so many guilty people in the town, they don't know who hired him, and they don't know who he's going to kill.
It's a great idea.
And it's a terrific movie, and it's one of Jack's best pictures. And he stayed at Universal for, a little bit longer than Shrinking Man. And then went to Paramount, made a number of pictures at Paramount. And then when he lucked into the Gilligan's Island thing, he ended up doing a lot of television.
Yeah, people don't realize he gave birth to Gilligan's Island. I do admire that about him a lot, looking back at his career. I never met him, never knew him, but he just went to work. He's like, I'm a director. I'm going to go direct.
I was lucky enough to get to meet Jack Arnold when I came out to Hollywood in the 70s. And in fact, I was the backup director for a movie he was going to do, a remake of The Creature from the Black Lagoon that he was going to do at Universal, because he had by then had a leg amputated, and they were worried that if there was if there was a hill, then I'd have to climb it. Anyway, for various reasons that didn't work out. But Jack was extremely nice to me and my other Roger Corman veteran friends who were all gaga over this guy who'd had such a long career. And I got to know his daughter, Susan, who became my casting director on The Howling.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
And he was a very nice guy. Unfortunately, I watched him in decline because, by the time I got out of here, he was already having a lot of health problems. But he was very supportive of young filmmakers. And Universal was actually very good to him. I mean, they supported him even on his last project, The Lost World, which they knew he was not going to be able to make. And he had Albert Whitlock working on it. He had a lot of other people working on it who were friends of his.
Yeah.
And John Landis, I think, was producing it. And they all encouraged him as if the movie was going to be made.
He made them a lot of money.
Well, he did. And they were very grateful. And I've never forgot that about that company. He had a very interesting career that could have been better had the projects been a little more sophisticated.
As a director, do you see him having a distinctive style? Was he a journeyman or was he an auteur?
I think all directors bring something specific to their films, but when people think of Jack Arnold, they think of a certain kind of movie, partly because of assignments that he was given and partly because of movies that he wanted to make. But the auteur question often is like, well, can you turn on a movie and watch it for a couple of shots and tell who directed it? Occasionally that's true. More often it's true you can tell what studio it was made at. And there was a house style. And the house style was adopted by the people who were successful and disregarded by the people who weren't asked back.
I have to say, I've never heard of that before. And that, like, Universal had a different style than Paramount or Fox.
Well, it's the way they look. I could tell a Columbia picture from the 50s easily from a Universal picture, usually because they're much flatter and cheaper. The sets are cheaper. Columbia was known as the poverty lot. I mean, everything was done. When Sam Katzman, who was making basically the same kind of movies, would do these pictures, they would always end up looking cheaper than the ones that were made at Universal. And even a director like Fred Sears, who was a very prolific a director at Columbia, who did movie after movie after movie and did so many movies in 1957 that he dropped dead, was a very efficient director, but he didn't have the quality that Jack Arnold had in terms of being able to present a story in a reasonably attractive way.
If Jack Arnold wanted to do a long opening of Touch of Evil shot, like if you wanted to do like a long 1-minute tracking shot or something, the Universal would have went, no.
Well, Universal said no to Wells until they didn't know what he was doing. you
Yeah.
know.
But I don't think people understand that, like, a director can't just do whatever they want.
No, you're beholden to a lot of other people when you're directing. First of all, it's a responsibility. It's not your money. Most often, it's not your money.
Yeah.
It's somebody else's money.
If you're smart, it's not your money.
If you're smart, and you're responsible for it. So he was definitely a pragmatic director, and except for his penchant, overused penchant, for having people scare other people by putting their hands on their shoulders in little jump scares that never worked in any movie that he ever did. He's pretty consistent. But after his period at Universal, I think he wanted to change, and he ended up directing an extremely unlikely Jack Arnold picture called The Mouse That Roared with Peter Sellers, which was
Right.
a surprise art house hit.
I did not know that was Jack Arnold.
Nobody does. It's a typical British movie with an American director, and when you put it up against other British comedies of that type, it's still a little different because of the sensibility that he brings to it, which
Yeah.
is purely American.
The American way of presenting humor, drastically different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's much more upfront. But I've heard that Arnold directs The Shrinking Man with flat precision, and I think it's very accurate. It's a very precise movie. It's not a stylish movie, and Jack wasn't a, quote, stylish director in the Orson Welles sense. Arnold was very practical, and his
Yeah.
pictures didn't go over budget. One of the reasons The Shrinking Man didn't cost so much money is because the standard practice at Universal at the time was that unless it was a really, really A movie, the music was mostly tracked from library cues. And if there was something needed that was different, then they would get one of their house composers like Mancini or...
Right. Yeah, and Henry Mancini was a house composer at Universal.
to write that stuff. And Joseph Gershenson, the music coordinator, usually got the credit. Occasionally, they would credit some of the individual composers, but in The Shrinking Man, the guy who wrote the original theme that Ray Anthony plays the trumpet solo on at the beginning, which is fabulous, is a guy named Irving Gertz. I have a whole bunch of paperwork from Universal of all these different various pictures from the 50s, and it explains each cue, and it tells you where this cue came from. You know, what movie did
Right.
they get this from? And sometimes you'd be watching science fiction pictures and they have Western cues in them, and vice versa.
The movie that Jack Arnold is probably the most known for, Creature from the Black Lagoon, the trumpet, bah, 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 that was purportedly written by Henry Mancini. And it later shows up in King Kong versus Godzilla. You know, it's
Well,
like
all
this
the
cue
music
just
in
found
King Kong
its-
versus Godzilla is Universal Library tracks,
Yeah,
because they
it's-
threw out all the Tokyo music. when they
Right,
died,
right.
And said, well, we'll just do our own version.
Yeah, but I remember being, even as a kid, going, wait a minute, that's the Creature from the Black Lagoon's music.
And you know what? It didn't help that movie one bit. But the other reason the picture wasn't particularly expensive was because it has a contract movie cast. The people who are in the movie are people who are contract players at Universal. And Albert Zugsmith, who is the producer, He also directed, he did a picture that's a favorite of mine called Confessions of an Opium Eater, which is one of the more bizarre movies to come out of Hollywood in the 60s. Zegsmith wanted Dan O'Hurley to play the lead, and who's a terrific actor. But O'Hurley had already played a role in which he was the sole character in the movie practically, which was Robinson Crusoe, which he was nominated for an Academy Award for. And he didn't feel, I think, that he wanted to do that again. And so the role fell to Grant Williams, who was a contract player at Universal.
It is a really underrated performance. I mean, he's really well cast, and he carries the last half of that movie, a lot of it without dialogue.
He probably hoped, maybe even expected, that this was going to put him on the map, because this is his movie. But that didn't happen. He ended up doing The Leech Woman. Grant Williams got one more shot at a lead in a picture called The Couch, which was made at Warner Brothers from a Robert Bloch book. I think he expected, okay, this is the one. Crickets chirped.
Yeah.
And he ended up having, I think, not the career he wanted. I think partly because he was closeted.
Yeah.
And I think that probably worked against him. But he's terrific in the movie. And after Shrinking Man became a hit, of course, there was a big run on shrunken people movies. The Attack of the Puppet People was the immediate ripoff.
And as anyone knows, if you want to make money in a movie, get the word puppet in the title. And it's just then you mint it.
But then Land of the Giants obviously was a big deal for a long time on TV. And Irwin Allen was, notorious for stealing other people's ideas and building on it to giant money machines.
You made Inner Space. Was that influenced by Shrinking Man at all, or?
Well, it was to the point that, I realized I was making another movie about a person who gets shrunk. And I know what my go-to movie would be for people who get shrunk.
There's no medical precedent for what's happening to you. I simply know that you're getting smaller.
So I thought, well, it might be fun to cast Bill Shallert, who was an actor that I had always liked. I said, well, let's have the shrinking man's doctor in our movie, so that when our hero, Marty Short, who has a shrunken Dennis Quaid flying around inside him, can go to the doctor, he goes to the shrinking man's doctor. And the shrinking man's doctor tells him that you can't possibly have a person inside you, because people just don't get smaller, except in the movies.
People don't get shorter, Mr. Carey. They just don't get shorter.
There's a million things that go into making a movie, and the fact that any movie turns out to be a good movie is a miracle.
True.